Good day. My name is Josh Johnston. I'm a research scientist with the Canadian Forest Service. I'm also the WildFireSat principal investigator. A lot of people oftentimes ask us about some of the unique features and why we've designed WildFireSat the way we have. And the answer comes from fire management. And so today, what we want to do is give you a closer look at how we manage fires in Canada. You know, WildFireSat is really about generating intelligence on wildfires. And, you know, the type of information you need really depends on the type of decision you're making. And there's all kinds of different decision making that goes on in fire management, you know, whether it's strategically at a regional level or right down to the fire line itself. There's different scales of data, there's different qualities of information, there's different questions that need to be answered. And depending on what it is you're doing, you may need a very specialized tool or you may not. And so what we tried to do throughout this whole process is unravel some of the decision making that happens and figure out what is appropriate to answer with satellites and what isn't.
So the wildfire management strategy for the province of Ontario is really based on a theme that kind of focuses around appropriate response. When you look at the vast areas of northern Ontario and the boreal forest that is part of northern Canada, you know, there's going to be areas where fire is wanted and where fire shouldn't happen. So it's dependent on the proximity to values or the forest industry component in the area, or, you know, working with our First Nations Indigenous communities. We have to recognize that as an organization, we don't always have the capacity to respond to every fire. Part of that is linked to just the availability of resources, but part of it is also linked to the strategy and our overarching, you know, requirement to take into consideration the ecological issues that are around fire management. So in some cases, it's just the right thing to do from an ecological perspective to allow some natural fire on the landscape. And in other cases, it's strictly we don't want fires in this area because of the impact on the public or people's safety and smoke emissions and things like that.
When I first started as a fire ranger, I learned the theory, but I honestly didn't know what putting out a wildfire would look like. And I imagine many researchers feel the same. They know the fire science, but the actual fire management seems a bit vague. When we're talking about how we go about fighting wildfires, each fire is different and has its own challenges. But generally speaking, once a fire is detected, either through the aerial detection program or called in by the public, the fire managers will assess the information given and decide how to respond. You look at the location, size, and intensity of a wildfire, and that will determine the type of response fire managers will need to assign, such as the number of crews required or if air attack is needed, and if any special equipment like sprinklers for value protection are required. For example, if the initial report of a wildfire is small, typically one fire crew will be dispatched.
Today we're on red alert on Halittac 8. So first we make sure that the helicopter is loaded up and everything's good to go. Have the pump run up, make sure it's not going to break down on us. If we're on a helicopter for initial attack, usually the crew leader will decide a location he wants us to land in, and if it's inaccessible by the helicopter, we'll do a hover exit, and as the chainsaw operator, I'll get out of the helicopter and I'll build a helipad so we can land safely, unload our equipment, and once the helicopter's gone, we'll gather, get our safety instructions, and figure out tactics on how to suppress the fire. I'm normally the nozzler, so I'll have someone with me. He'll be laying out hose. Coming back, we'll usually have to work with a two-man hose lay, so myself as the nozzler and one person laying out hose, which is a lot of work for the one guy until we can get the pump efficiently running, and then he'll come up the line. We'll have a three-person hose lay while the crew leader is doing his stuff. So basically what our main goal is to get the fire wrapped, and we want to get it under control or being held as soon as possible. So it's not about how fast you get the hose out, it's how well you're digging your brake line. So you want to make sure that you have a nice guard so the fire won't jump that.
So I think there's a lot of different things I really enjoy about fire. I mean, the job itself is quite intense and quite thrilling. Not only am I going to be flying around in a helicopter, but I'm going to be over top of trees that are torching off. I'm going to have a smoke column behind me, and as you see that happening in nature and to a degree some devastation, it's a quite humbling experience, especially when you get to be boots on the ground and then you walk up to the fire. It's quite the interesting phenomenon. And then just also, I think just like the sense of like purpose and helping other people. Especially in Ontario, you're in Northwestern Ontario, you're protecting communities, not just ones in the far north, but even in my hometown, Pickle Lake, it's almost been burned down by a couple fires. And to be a member of a group that is able to go in and help provide some relief for people is something I really love and enjoy about the job. And on top of that, just the camaraderie you have with other firefighters, not just in Ontario, but other wildland firefighters across Canada, even into the States and across the world.
You know, even for me, I've got some friends back home, they're like, oh, I would love to be doing what you're doing. And I'm like, yeah, but you need to be able to push yourself and have the right mindset, because it isn't easy every day. So at the forefront, you know, on an easy level, I would say do it 100%, but you also have to realize that they're not all easy days. And you know, are you prepared to wake up every morning and put on wet boots from the day before, and your feet will be wet in 10 minutes when you've started the pump up, and you know, you're working 16-hour days from day one on until it's under control or being held. And you really just gotta look in the mirror and ask yourself if you can do that.
So I used to be a firefighter. I grew up in a family of firefighters, and a number of my family members are still in the program. But I can tell you that I can remember as a young child, you know, in the late 80s, early 90s, my father talking about satellites and how he was convinced they were going to change the way we do business in fire management. And he wasn't wrong. You know, it was around 1986 that the first scientific paper showed that it was possible to do this. But it was quite underwhelming in some ways, right? We never really saw that realized into a transformational operational change.
Well, remote sensing is used in a lot of different aspects of fire management, but often it's used because of the way that the current products are developed. Not that many of them are operationally suitable for use in fire agencies. So you can use them to look at pre-burn conditions, sort of what fuels are available and how flammable they are. You can look at fires during the burning phase, so you can see where fires are on the landscape. And go away and look at what we often refer to as burned areas to examine exactly the detail of where fires have burned, and that will feed into fire emission measurements.
So, you know, we can use existing satellites to kind of piecemeal together what the fire's doing, but obviously they're not designed specifically for fire, and they're definitely not involved with end users. And so advancing technologically how we view fires and when we view fires, but also in terms of the engagement with the people who are using it, ensuring it's a co-development, not just like a solution that is forced upon people.
So WildfireSat will be designed to overpass at the right time at peak burn for the latitudes of Canada that see a lot of the fire activity. And that's really important. So instead of just saying, you know, here's an image, this is the anticipated rate of spread, and oh, this is going to be the cloud cover, so you might miss this overpass. And this kind of, you know, fire intelligence that will give them more informed decision making. It's hopefully going to be really, really awesome.
And we are very, very fortunate that after all this time, we're the ones who get to bring this over the finish line. It's an exciting time, and I think that the amount of involvement across all domains, federal, provincial, industrial, and international, is what's going to really make or break this whole thing.
A very rewarding experience is probably after every single fire. Once the helicopter picks you up and it's a sea of black, and you're just like, I was a part of that. I was a part of suppressing this. You almost become nostalgic in a way, because you're like, I've been living here for the last 2 weeks, and I was a part of putting this fire out and saving all these trees and these habitats for animals. So that's probably a really rewarding experience on its own after every fire, seeing the work you've accomplished.